Months ago, when we learned that our city could expect a pretty significant allocation of funding from President Biden's American Rescue Plan, like my colleagues on the City Council, I was excited about what could be a once-in-a-generation opportunity that it presents for our community. This financial boost to Salt Lake City represents not just an opportunity for citywide recovery as we still bear through the pandemic, but also a chance to make an investment that can create lasting, equitable, and generational change for Salt Lakers. A chance to do what I talked about in my State of the City this year, to come back better and stronger than we were before the pandemic. Salt Lake City is set to receive about $85 million through the plan. That'll be divided into 2 installments, the second of which won't arrive until next year. For months, my team has closely studied the federal guidance, which has been somewhat slow coming, on just how those dollars could be spent. And we've cross-checked it with the city's very long list of needs. We've drawn on results from our citywide resident surveys, public comment in meetings we hold, suggestions from the community, the city council's priorities, and best practices that are being identified by other cities in the country. I am proud of the thoroughness and the creativity that my team has brought to this process, and I'm excited to share with you today the details of my recommendation for these funds to our City Council. The full plan was transmitted to our City Council just last week, and they will begin their process to consider the programs starting tomorrow. It's framed by 4 main themes: building community resilience, community grants, homelessness and public safety, and taking care of our city. First, I want to share with you the work we've been doing to identify the most transformational investments that we can make as a city to change the lives of generations of our residents. Early last year, when I started this job, I asked our economic development team what was the one thing that we could do or invest in to improve access to opportunity and build economic strength for our residents in our city. They were smart enough to partner with the University of Utah's Sorensen Impact Center to answer that question. The center spent most of the last year researching what interventions would be game changers for our residents. Their phase 1 findings point to 2 specific investments that we should make to lift up our society and our economy as a whole. Those 2 are early childhood education and workforce training that's prioritized for single mothers. High-quality early childhood education has lasting benefits to the children that can change their trajectory for success, from social and emotional to academic well-being. Access to programs like this aren't just an investment in each child, but also in their families and in our citywide and even statewide economic strength. We also know that children raised in poverty, even if only for a few short years, are more likely to live in poverty as adults. And Salt Lake City is home to the majority of at-risk census tracts in the state. These residents face the highest barriers to economic opportunity and are most likely to continue the cycle of intergenerational poverty. Our solutions have to be as dynamic as the hardships that we're facing. And any successful intervention of this cycle needs to be targeted at multi-generational outcomes. Today, I'm happy to announce that my first funding recommendation for rescue plan spending is a major investment in childcare, early childhood education, and workforce training to increase the skills and earning potential of parents. The City Council has already supported the first phase of that research that Sorensen Impact Center has done, and now I'm asking the Council to set aside $10 million of our city's rescue plan allocation for future investment in this program. If approved, the city would set aside rescue plan funding and look to leverage private investments to support the expansion beyond the $10 million, expanding programs like our Salt Lake School District pre-K, high-quality early childhood care and education, home visits from nurses and educators to support parents, and a targeted workforce development program. Today, we're happy to be hosted here at Horizonte, which is an example of the types of community-centric locations that I envision housing the programming that we're talking about with this initiative. Frankly, it's not surprising that an investment in childcare and early childhood education would be the most transformational investment we can make in our collective future success and to help families to thrive. Nationally, families with infants pay $16,000 a year to cover the cost of childcare. In most counties here in Utah, families with average income who need full-time childcare are spending 10 to 20% of their household income per child. Those figures, coupled with statistics showing that 57% of two-parent households have both parents working, and 83% of single-parent households work full-time, shows that finding solutions for this issue involve not just access to affordable, high-quality childcare, but can help parents have the capacity to gain new skills and earn more. It is hard work out there for working parents. I get it. There's not a day that goes by when I'm not having to balance the needs of my family with my job. And compared to a lot of people in this city, I have got it pretty easy. How do we make it easier for single parents, for low-income families, for people who are stuck in the intergenerational cycle of poverty that makes it so hard for our residents to take advantage of the real opportunities of growth happening here in our capital city? My vision for this investment includes neighborhood centers throughout the city that offer childcare and early childhood education for our kids and job training and workforce development opportunities for their parents. One-stop services that can empower Salt Lake City residents to build careers and support their families. Pending the council's approval of the Phase 2 funding for this work, the Sorensen Impact Center will develop specific success metrics for our programs, and it should take about 6 to 9 months for Phase 2 to complete. While Phase 2 research is happening, it is my goal to greatly leverage our $10 million investment with private investment that can grow these programs even more, making this investment truly catalytic for our community. By investing in our city's youth and extending that investment to their families, we can make an impact that creates an intergenerational cycle of progress, a pathway that truly enhances equitable growth for our communities. We can change lives and lifetimes with this funding. Second, well over a year now into this pandemic, one positive outcome of the need to social distance has been a renewed appreciation and use of our city's parks. They've become more than a playground or a place to barbecue or have a picnic. They've become havens for our residents to be connected in the community. City parks are one of our most precious resources, especially with the fastest growing population in the nation here in Utah. With a growing city and all the changes that naturally come with that, both good and bad, now is the time for us to create a better level of park stewardship to ensure that they're welcoming and safe and positive for all to enjoy. With that goal in mind, I'm excited to announce that my second proposal for the rescue plan is a $3.9 million investment in the creation of Salt Lake City Public Lands Park Rangers. From City Park in Denver to Central Park in New York City, Griffith Park in Los Angeles, all great cities across this nation rely on park rangers to foster a welcoming place for residents. And they watch over that precious public open space that we share. We are eager and we're ready for this work to begin in Salt Lake City. Under the umbrella of our city's Public Lands Department, I'm proposing the initial hiring of 16 park rangers who will steward Liberty Park, Pioneer Park, Jordan Park and the Jordan River Parkway, and Fairmont Park. Our rangers will be resources to park visitors. They'll have information on park history, area wildlife, and natural resources. They can help with directions, park rules, and public events. And perhaps most importantly, rangers will play an important role in helping address a very real concern that I know our city's residents have had for a long time, which is safety in our city's parks. I know that rising crime in our parks has concerned all of us. Every person in our city should feel safe spending time in our parks, and these rangers will play an integral role in creating an atmosphere of safety and reliability. Each ranger will be equipped to resolve the safety concerns of park rangers. They'll also be trained in first aid and have a direct line to our police and fire departments for urgent issues. Having the friendly face of a ranger in our city parks is a logical next step in the way our city works to create safe and engaging community spaces for our residents and our visitors. And I'm excited for the potential of this program to transform the way we use those spaces. Third, there is no question that COVID-19 has and continues to have some monumental impacts on our people and businesses throughout the country and right here in our capital city. Through these continuing hardships, some of our best ideas and most creative solutions have come from the community itself. Our residents and our business owners have their finger on the pulse of the community needs, from Tip Your Server program to the Open Streets Initiative, Raise Up SLC. Our community-based organizations and community members have been so critical in helping us identify who and how we can help as a city. As we continue to look for ways to mitigate the negative impacts on the long-term health and the well-being of our residents and our economy, community involvement is a crucial component, which is why I'm proud to propose a $4 million community grant pool. If funded, we'll split this $4 million between our Community and Neighborhoods Department, which we call CAN, and the Economic Development Department for grant funding that focuses on nonprofit support and business assistance, respectively. These two departments will open up requests for proposals, or RFPs, this fall that will look for community-based organizations that can demonstrate an ability to address a COVID-related issue ranging from legal services to eviction assistance to access to healthcare, as well as grants and support for small, local, and art or artisan-based businesses. By putting a portion of our rescue plan funding directly into the hands of the people and organizations that need it the most, we are working to ensure that as recovery from the pandemic takes place, it's equitable, and that those who have felt the greatest burdens of the pandemic can build back without systemic barriers as an additional factor in their way to success. Fourth is access to housing and housing affordability that has always been essential factors in the safety and stability of our city's residents. But through the pandemic, we've seen that availability and affordability shrink even more, widening the gap for equitable access to these fundamental needs of housing. While work on the city's very first gentrification mitigation plan will help us to balance the growth and preservation of our diverse community fabric and ensure housing choice and equity for all residents, there is a complementary path forward that's toward affordable home ownership and community building that we are ready for our city to invest in now. I'm proposing $4 million toward a new city endeavor, the West Side Community Land Initiative. It's an urban land fund that will help residents build a new financial foundation through access to affordable housing and home ownership. Our city's RDA will lead this initiative with the express purpose of creating accessible, sustainable, affordable housing and helping community members build wealth and community stability and prosperity. Through this initiative, the RDA will acquire property and land with the goal of holding it in perpetuity in order to keep housing affordable over the long term. Revenue generation from those RDA property ownership would be reinvested into the fund and go directly back to the community. And perhaps most exciting, we'll create a shared equity home ownership program, giving residents an affordable way to get into home ownership and allow them to retain their portion of the home's appreciation should they sell, creating a stepping stone to financial independence. The initiative will look to utilize affordable housing set-aside funds, some of those from the Inland Port affordable housing set-asides, and expand its scope of work beyond the RDA's 25-year project area. This is in perpetuity. Research that was released just last Wednesday by the University of Utah Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute underscores the acute need for innovative housing solutions like these. In 2021, our state's median priced home was $460,000. That prices out over half of the state's population from home ownership. With limited resources to finance higher housing prices, and a narrowing of affordable rental stock. Putting a roof over your head really has never been harder. We want to help remove the barriers for our residents who face the steepest challenges to housing, and the Westside Community Land Initiative can help be that stepping stone. Fifth, I'm prioritizing more funding around homelessness. Our city has stepped up time and again. We've provided resources and emergency shelter needs, and while we continue to push for sister jurisdictions and other levels of government to do the same, we're also committed to seeking creative solutions here in our city, as we always have. In September 2020, we launched the Community Commitment Program. That was through our Homeless Engagement and Response Team, HEART, and they've prioritized outreach to individuals experiencing homelessness while also emphasizing the need to keep public spaces clean, safe, and accessible to all. After a year of the Community Commitment Program work, there are fewer large encampments throughout our city, but projections estimate that in 2021, the city will receive around 6,000 calls for help. These are through our city-sourced app, asking for help with smaller encampments. That's triple the number of reports that we've had in years past. While the Community Commitment Program began as a weeks-long endeavor of outreach and cleanup with fewer large encampments today, we know that there's an evolving need for frequency and speed in responding to smaller camps. To that end, I will propose to the City Council a $2.9 million fund toward the creation of the Community Commitment Program Rapid Intervention Team. That will work to effectively and rapidly respond with outreach and with intervention to offer resources to those in need and to help our public spaces remain clean, safe, and accessible to all. We also know that with winter fast approaching, there's a need for additional space in the countywide shelter system to provide people with opportunity of a safe, warm place to sleep at night. I'm proposing that the City Council set aside approximately $1 million of the city's rescue plan funding for emergency winter shelter anywhere in Salt Lake County to be used to assist the eventual shelter operator with operational costs or fund other expenses like public safety or neighborhood mitigation. Utah's homelessness crisis is at a critical point. Our city has and we will continue to do our part, but in order to make real progress, we need the willing formation of partnerships. We need both countywide and statewide partners to work collectively on its solutions. Finally, we want to continue to be in a strong position to care for the day-to-day needs of our city's residents. And that means ensuring that our city's financial foundation is secure and that we're fully staffed and we're fully functioning with the resources and services our residents need. Also, that our employees are paid a living wage to do this work. That's why a significant portion of our rescue plan funding is pledged toward employee compensation and revenue losses that we have experienced and we will continue to experience due to COVID impacts. Our residents, our businesses, and our visitors need to be able to count on our city government to meet their needs, and our people are the most important part of doing that. I know we've covered a lot of ground today, and I think it's exciting to have these kind of opportunities, but there are proposals in here that have the potential to transform generations in our city, tangible investments. And I'll recap the proposal. There's 6 of them. $10 million for childcare, early childhood education, and workforce training centers. $3.9 million toward the creation of a public lands park ranger program. $4 million for a community grant pool. $4 million toward the creation of the Westside Community Land Initiative, $2.9 million for our Community Commitment Program Rapid Response Team, and $1 million for emergency winter shelter operations anywhere in Salt Lake County, and about $55 million, which is the revenue replacement and employee compensation for our city's financial foundation. The proposals are both fiscally sound and incredible opportunities for catalytic change in our city. Change for good, change that will benefit the lives of Salt Lakers for generations to come. I'm looking forward to working with the City Council in the weeks and months ahead. I encourage the public to have your voices heard as we go through the public process of the City Council considering these opportunities. And I'm happy to take any questions.
How many jobs do you think this will create?
How many jobs? So of the metrics that Phase 2 with Sorensen Impact Center will be coming out with, that is a part of the work. Looking at the census tracts today, HUD defines low opportunity areas across the country, so we know the census tracts that we could begin focusing in. And then looking, thanks to our recent census data as well, what's the population, what's the youth makeup, how many children could be eligible potentially for this, and then looking at the workforce that exists there. So that will be part of the results in the next 6 to 9 months.
Some of this is ongoing funds, you're talking with living wages, stuff like that, but this is one-time money. So how do you balance using this stimulus money for wages or ongoing hires?
Yeah, you mean with the portion that's about the city's financial foundation with our own wages? Yes. So we are looking at actually my CFO probably doesn't appreciate me sharing this already, but we're seeing some very positive revenue return on portions of our sales tax. And we took a conservative approach with our budget in the last 2 years, I think, which was responsible, and it's been good for us. But we are looking at increased revenues coming into the city, which gives us some strong indication that we'll be able to continue with the pay increases that we did back in July and August for city employees with the increasing revenue and time when this one-time fund lapses.
The housing fund for the west side, how is that different from what the housing authority is already doing? Can you help us understand?
That's a great question that I haven't thought through the contrast with the city or the county housing authorities. We've thought about it through the redevelopment function, as our redevelopment agency currently administers our affordable housing dollars through the city, and the perpetuity of it, but also that there's a focus here on the perpetuity. It makes it distinguished from traditional redevelopment project areas, but the return to residents themselves of a portion of the equity is not something that we see in the housing authorities, to my knowledge, where a homeowner through the program can build. Obviously the home builds equity, and should they sell, they are entitled to a portion of that growth. The increment above and beyond that goes back into the community fund. So I don't know that there is a program like this in Salt Lake County, even with our housing authorities.
This would be buying single family homes?
Actually, multifamily as well.
I guess what's the shortage right now in terms of trying to keep SLC fully staffed? Do you have a number in terms of what the employee shortage is? Because obviously everyone's kind of got shortages.
It varies from department to department, and we've talked a lot about our police shortage, which is at 55 paid positions that are open right now. As I've said before, I think Salt Lake City Police Department is hiring faster than any other department in the state of Utah. So that's a work in progress. It's also a challenge across the country. But there are departments who, let me back up, when we were entering the pandemic, we went into a hiring freeze that lasted for about a year. So services grew, the demand for services and needs of city staff grew actually across the course of that year. We reinstated we unfreezed the hiring freeze about 8 or 10 months ago. And so we've been trying to hire up, but there's still capacity needs. Over the last year, we've talked a lot about police and calls for service, and that is indicative of the demand for services across citywide departments in many ways. It's up about 27%, those calls for service in Salt Lake City, just over the year before. So whether that's the growing residential units in our city, which have been about 1,000 a year we're adding, and the increased services therein, cleaning up at our parks, neighborhood needs, Salt Lake City's growing. We're growing rapidly. We have more residents than we've ever had in our city's history. So I don't have a total number for you of open positions, but it's something that we could look into and get back to you with.
In the follow-up to that, you mentioned the police and the 55 jobs there. How much will this park ranger project help with that? Because obviously there's been a significant amount of calls that go directly toward parks.
Right, and all we can do is look at how the creation of park ranger programs in other cities outside of the state of Utah have been helpful in calls for service with first responders. As I mentioned, these park rangers will be trained in first aid, but they will not necessarily be EMTs. We'd still have that line of access to first responders, but it has been very impactful in other cities and other parts of the country, not just in reducing the calls for service through 911, but in creating more approachable, safe, accessible parks in these big cities.
Can you say a little bit more about the neighborhood centers you were talking about?
Sure.
For childcare, workforce training. Are these repurposing established buildings and, you know?
Keep going, that's a good idea.
What are you thinking of these and how they would actually work?
Well, it's too soon for me to get into too much detail, but I know as a parent with 3 kids ranging in ages across 10 years that how far you have to take your kid to childcare impacts your day-to-day life, your quality of life, and in many ways the character of your own neighborhood. So if you're able to have childcare and workforce training centers that are located in the neighborhoods that need them, you're minimizing the transportation costs, you're helping create a sense of security and education focused in the neighborhoods. And I would love to see an integration of other services to that one-stop services point I mentioned around even food access and other family needs that could be rendered through these centers. What the buildings are, let's get creative. There are buildings in our neighborhoods, in our historic neighborhoods that could be repurposed, and part of the leveraging of the $10 million I'm asking the council to set aside while phase 2 research happens would absolutely include ways to leverage these dollars through infrastructure that could come to the conversation through private investment or philanthropic.
Mayor, would these services be free to families or reduced cost? Because that's a big part of this, right? The cost of being there.
Right, it absolutely is. And the financial structure is part of the phase 2 research with Sorensen, but we look at places like this Head Start classroom, Salt Lake City School District's pre-K. There are sliding scale opportunities, but absolutely no fee opportunities as well. That's our goal. And how much we can leverage from the community to build that $10 million that I'm asking for it will clearly determine how many students and families we can serve, and then what their level of participation, if any, needs to be. So there's a lever there, how many and how much.
And when you want them able to have this in place?
My goal is to have the leveraged funds in the next year, and this 6 to 9 months pending council approval of the phase 2 piece of the funding lines up with about 1 year there.
Could you go back, I guess, to the park ranger program, and I guess what would be the responsibilities of rangers then?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, they'd be informational if you were there. For example, there's a lot of people go to Liberty Park to birdwatch, and they could have anything on natural resources and wildlife in the area to be able to talk to you about the water flow, the ponds, the wildlife in there, but also if you're a visitor to the park and you wanted to know how old that place is or what used to be there, that Hogle Zoo was in Liberty Park a long time ago. Park rules, making sure that events that are happening there also have those eyes on the park and assistance as well. And then helping connect people who are in need with either resources or being able to call on our first responders if there's a criminal issue happening. I think they're pretty wide-ranging duties, but really trying to create a persistent, positive, helpful presence in our city's most utilized parks.